Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, y'all can hear me. Sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties there. Thank you for joining today. I really appreciate you guys for joining. Hopefully, everyone had their cups of coffee this morning. I know we gave you guys some time to get everything organized, but sorry about that. My name is Logan Kincaid. I'm an account executive with Oak Tree Funding. Wanted to go over a few topics, really two main topics today, bank statement versus DSCR, and hopefully give you guys some ammo and some questions asked up front to help vet these deals out. We did give ourselves a 15-minute time slot. So any questions you guys have, please drop those in the chat and I'll run through those at the end. So let's go ahead and kick things off here. Our next slide, obviously the list of contents. So these are the topics that we're going to discuss. Take a peek at those. And I do want to start things off with understanding bank statement loans. I know obviously not everyone, is going to, exactly understand what a bank statement loan is. Actually, give me 1 second here. Shouldn't be moving that much. Hang on 1 second. One second here. What is going on? Here we go. Okay, cool. There we go. Okay, so understanding bank statement loans. I know some of you guys obviously have a ton of experience in bank statement loans. Maybe not all of you do. So I kind of just want to run through, understanding what a bank statement loan is. So obviously, these are loans that are designed for self-employed borrowers who, can't qualify convention because they obviously write a ton off on their taxes, right? We all hate taxes. So it's, it's something that, we see a lot of. And really, I feel, it's super simple. All we really look for in this is looking for 12 months of bank statements. And all we're really looking at is the business cash flow, deposits, and obviously what kind of business do they operate. And, if any of you haven't done a bank statement loan before, please call me after this. Let's go over this program. Those of you that aren't using the bank statement loan are really missing out on probably one of the biggest borrower demographics in America. We see a lot of income from these. A lot of people think that just because they, are trying to qualify banks into that, it's just not a good loan. It really is a good loan. Big loan amounts too. I mean, there's a lot of borrowers that are looking to qualify. So, keep a lookout for these. Obviously, if something like this comes across, you guys have any questions, like drop a message in the chat, or like I said, give me a call after. My information will be there at the end. So we can always chat and go over this kind of stuff. But let's also go over understanding DSCR loans. So obviously, this is a real estate investment loan that qualifies borrowers based on the property's cash flow. So the cool thing is, let me simplify it for you. Let's say, borrower's coming in, he says he wants to do a DSCR loan. Well, simple questions to ask, or to look at. All we're looking for is, are the rents going to qualify that full pity payment? So let's say the full pity payment is $3,500. Will the property rent for $3,500? If not, that's when we kind of look at, maybe even if it doesn't ratio, keep in mind we can still do it as a DSCR even if it doesn't ratio. We can go down. Typically, we want to go down to 0.75, but obviously you have LTV restrictions. There's other hits for that, especially if it's a short-term rental. That kind of stuff can hit them, but we can still do those loans. But sometimes the pricing is not as favorable. If a borrower wants 85% and it's a sub-1 ratio, it's we're not going to be able to get you 85%. That's when we look at potentially doing a bank statement loan. But DSCR loan is super simple. Will the full pity payment be covered by the market rent or by the rent in general, whether it's tenant occupied or if it's purchased? Obviously, we're going to go off the 1007. But just something to think about. DSCR is a super simplified program. It's something that definitely requires a lot less income document, or it doesn't require any income documentation, but it's super easy to qualify. Clean underwriting approval. Definitely loans that probably out of all the loans we do, these are loans that we can close the quickest for sure. So next, let's go over 1 second here. Let's go over why this product selection matters. So obviously, up front, it's always nice to vet these loan programs out. There's many situations where, borrower wants 85%. And don't get me wrong, a DSCR loan program is great, but it's not always the right fit for every borrower. I feel that, sometimes we have a borrower that comes in, look, you want to go 85%. Well, if the property doesn't quite cash flow, you don't want to run into a situation where, look, we submit this loan, week or two into the process, we have, you know, get market rent back on an appraisal, show that the property is actually not renting out for what the full pity payment is, and borrower's upset. It puts you in a tough situation as an LO and as a broker. So I feel what really helps us is trying to vet these loans up front. I want to give you guys some ammo to be able to understand, right? How can we vet these things up front? And later we'll go on, different questions we can ask, but this product selection matters because, obviously not everyone's going to fit in traditional mortgage guidelines. Not everyone can always do a DSCR loan if the property doesn't cash flow. So if we can know up front, hey, this property won't cash flow, okay, let's look at maybe your income. Let's say the borrower is self-employed, originally thinks he wants to go DSCR. Well, actually, maybe you talk to a realtor partner and, look, this property is probably not going to cash flow for what we're looking at on payment. So let's maybe look at doing a bank statement loan. Take a look at that outlet, right? So I feel that, I obviously, like I said, I do love DSCR loans. I think they're amazing, but it's not always going to work because everything is contingent on the appraisal, right? So if everything's contingent on the appraisal, what if the market rent comes in low, right? Market rent comes in low, you're in a tough situation, telling the borrower, hey, look, I actually need to flip this loan program to something different, right? I just had this situation happen. Look, one of my top broker partners just 2 weeks ago, I had, hey, look, he submitted this loan, was looking for 85% on the DSCR loan, right? He thought the property was going to cash flow well. And sometimes, maybe it's not easy to vet this stuff up front, but hopefully I can give you guys some information today and some ammo to understand, simple questions asked up front that may help, running into this problem later on in a loan process, right? So one of my broker partners had submitted a DSCR loan at 85%. Property, it was a purchase. So he thinks that, look, the property is going to rent for, I believe it was, I don't know, maybe $2,500. We thought, okay, that our full payment's about $2,500 we think that it'll, they thought it would ratio well. So we run it as a DSCR loan. And then we look at, hey, look, the appraisal comes back and our 1007 comes back at only 1,700, right? So it's a tricky situation. Borrower's upset. He's like, look, well, now you're looking at 75% with a higher rate, right? So it drops LTV by at least 10%, if not more, depending on what their FICO is. Now you're looking at 75% with probably an additional point hit in rate too, right? So it's a super tricky situation, but good for us. This borrower had strong income deposits as a self-employed borrower too. Great business, great income, great cash flow. So we just flipped it to a 12-month bank statement loan, got him 85%, closed the loan. So it's something that hopefully you guys see where I'm going with this. You can look up front and see, hey, maybe we could have looked at this up front, maybe talk to a realtor partner, maybe even ask the borrower, hey, what do you think this property might ratio for, just to protect yourselves from, let's say we submit a file, we're 2 weeks into the process as a DSCR loan, and now we're looking at flipping it to a bank statement loan, middle of the process. But at least you can protect your guys' self. You guys can protect yourself, saying, hey, look, what do you think this will ratio for up front? And if it doesn't, keep in mind, borrower, where keep in mind to your client, we might have to flip this later on if it doesn't ratio, just so they know up front, just to give you guys that piece of information, like, hey, if this does happen, this is where we're gonna have to go with things, just to kind of protect yourself. Because I hate seeing this where we run into, and brokers, some of the brokers I work with, you run into a situation like this. Luckily, we had an outlet to go self-employed, but if you didn't, it puts you in a tricky situation. It's always nice to vet these things up front. That way, you're not dealing with this 2 weeks into the process when borrower thinks we're going to close in a week, but really we're flipping to a whole nother program and potentially fully resubmitting the loan, right? So that's something to think about. Let's move over to the next slide here. Key qualification differences. So obviously, just to recap what we were talking about, we're talking about here is 2 different programs, 2 different methods of qualifying ATR, the ability to repay. People commonly refer to non-QM as subprime, right? I mean, way before my time, they were doing loans based on where the borrower, even had a pulse, right? So there really were no ATR qualifications. And I think that, this is something to think about. Just to recap, the beautiful thing about non-QM is that we have different ways of qualifying the borrower's ability to repay. Obviously on the DSCR loan, it's the property's cash flow, and on a bank loan, it's just the income cash flow from their business. Obviously we always want to look at what they're doing, because keep in mind, when it comes to a bank statement loan, you have to factor in the fact that, there is an expense factor. It depends on the kind of business they have, depends on what kind of business it is, whether it's a service or a product business, as well as the number of employees they have. All that stuff's going to play a role in, how we're going to hit them. As far as what expense we're going to use, or what full income we're going to use. There's always going to be a hit with it depending on what they do. But obviously, just to recap, these are 2 great programs. But I think DSCR loan is great, obviously. But like I said, in some cases, going bank statement, knowing these things up front is something that you want to take a look at, because we don't want to run into this stuff down the line, and obviously have to flip programs. So I think that Obviously, the big qualification difference here is, just to recap, obviously going DSCR, you're looking at just the property's cash flow. It seems super simple, but as you know, as I touched on before, based on how the rent looks, or even sometimes there's even even if it's a refi, we want to look at what the tenants are paying currently, because even what the tenants are currently paying doesn't always cover that. But obviously, the qualification difference on a bank statement loan, we're not looking at any of that. We're looking at just the income. If the income's solid, we're going to close the loan as that. But obviously, that's going to come with its own set of documentation. We want business narrative forms. We want to take a deep dive into the business, make sure it's in good standing. So as you can see, it's easier to go DSCR, but it's not always going to work, right? So that's always something to think about. Let's go over, arming you guys with the right information, just some questions to ask up front, right? On a bank statement loan, how long has the borrower been self-employed? Do they own 100% of the business? What type of business do they operate? How many employees do they have? And some of you may think, why do these questions matter, right? Well, I mean, if they own less than 100% of the business, right, are we going to use 100% of their income? No, we obviously won't. So, and obviously, look, we want to look at how long the borrower's been self-employed for. We typically want to see 2 years. Keep in mind, if you have a borrower who's been self-employed for 1 year, but they've either gone to school for it previously, or maybe they were a few years back, they were in the same line of work, or maybe they flipped from W-2 to self-employed. We can also look at that. They just need to at least be in the same line of work for 2 years. But we do usually want to see 2 years self-employment. But we can have those exceptions. So call me if you guys have any questions on that there. But obviously, how long they've been self-employed matters, because if they just started the business last week, will we feel comfortable lending on a loan for them? No, we obviously wouldn't, right? And the number of employees matters, because that, like I said, as before, I touched on before there with the expense factor, that's going to matter. Depending on how many employees they have, that's obviously more liability for them. We're going to take a hit on what how much income we can give them. Like on a service business, typically 1 to 5 employees, you're looking at 25% expense factor on those. But that's something I can go over afterwards if you guys have any questions on that. But some questions asked up front on a DSCR loan: does the borrower own a primary residence? Is the property vacant or tenant occupied? If tenant occupied, how much is the tenant paying? Right? You may ask, obviously, on this, why do these questions matter? Well, if they don't own a primary, it's always going to raise an eyebrow a little bit for us. Why don't they own a primary and they're trying to purchase a DSCR property? It has to make sense from an underwriting standpoint. The biggest thing is they don't own a primary residence. They're trying to purchase a DSCR property. We got to make sure they're not going to live in this. Obviously, it's going to be occupancy fraud if they're trying to live in that. Most cases, we have situations where the borrower is living rent-free, maybe with the parents, looking to purchase a home, as an investment property. Biggest things, sometimes we can make those loans work with proper documentation up front. The biggest thing, though, is that with a DSCR loan, there's also some cases where the borrower is actually living somewhere, not necessarily rent-free, they're actually renting somewhere. However, we just got to be able to prove that where they're renting now is going to be, we're going to be able to prove that that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. At least the next several months, we need to be able to prove that they're going to stay renting where they are, that they're not just going to turn around and occupy this DSCR property. Otherwise they need to be purchasing as a primary residence if that's the case, right? And the biggest thing is, if the other question I asked here, if the property is vacant or tenant occupied, that stuff matters, because as a broker, if it's vacant, you want to do some research. Maybe ask your client how much they feel the property will rent for. They may not know. You can always ask a realtor partner. And if the property is tenant occupied, how much is the tenant paying? Because that'll let us know right up front, whether that full pity payment will be covered by the market, or by either the market rent or what the tenant's currently paying, the actual current current rent that the tenant's paying, right? So it's always something to think about. And hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of questions to ask. I'm sure you guys will have some questions. I'll run through those at the end through our chat box here. But on our next slide here, another thing I wanted to go over is foreign national opportunities. The cool thing is Fannie Mae doesn't really do true foreign nationals. So I definitely, I'll say it's not something that I see a lot of. I do see it every once in a while. The cool thing is DSCR expands your net for clients. Obviously, it gives you the option to look at foreign nationals, right? There are lots of borrowers from other countries want to invest in the United States. So it's something nice to look at. And obviously, if you guys have any questions on foreign national, give me a call after. Like I said, it's not something that I see a ton of as an account executive, but it's something that it definitely pops up every once in a while. It's nice for you guys. Maybe it's a loan here or there that it pops up and, hey, look, I do have this outlet with Oaktree Funding. They can get this loan done, right? So it's super cool. But in addition to foreign national, DSCR in general has a lot of other opportunities, right, and a lot of other upsides. We also do 5 to 8 units. We also do non-warrantable condos. We can do short-term rentals. As I spoke on before, short-term rental does it does definitely affect, LTV and stuff like that. It really just depends. But the cool thing is with short-term rental, we can always take a look at, you know, with short-term rental, we can look at ledgers from VRBO, Airbnb. We typically want to see a 12-month ledger on how the property's been, cash flowing and renting out, right? But I think that the cool thing about DSCR is being able to use short-term rental, pull ledgers from VRBO and Airbnb is something we've seen a lot of, and I think it's really helpful for you guys. It's really simple documentation. It can show us whether or not the property is truly cash flowing based on short-term. Because a lot of borrowers a lot of properties rent really, really well short term in certain areas, as you guys know, right? So biggest thing is, right, I mean, you want in with more investors. This is your guys' opportunity. DSCR is a big thing. Side note, guys, obviously, as I said, Fannie Mae doesn't truly allow foreign national, but they also, on DSCR, Fannie Mae only allows 10 max finance properties, right? 10 max for Fannie Mae. With us, literally no max. There is absolutely zero max. So please don't hesitate to call me on this with any questions. It's definitely huge. We have a lot of borrowers that come through and they're a little bit worried. Brokers are asking us, well, this guy's got 20 properties. I'm a little bit worried about it. He's got 30 or 50 properties. I'm worried about it. I'm like, no, look, we're good. It's not something that we're worried about. We really don't have a true max. So that's something that's really nice. It's definitely earned us a lot of business doing that. So let's go over next some common mistakes that brokers may make. That are brokers that I've worked with, that I've seen a few mistakes right up front, right, is not identifying the borrower's true goal early in the process, right? Truly understand their goal. What are they trying to accomplish and why, right? That'll help you vet and ask those questions that we talked about previously in the slide. What questions to ask up front, because the biggest thing is, what are they trying to accomplish? This is important not only in understanding the loan structure up front and vetting these loans out, asking the right questions, but when you truly understand the borrower's true goal, maybe you find other bits and pieces of information of maybe future loans they want to do. Look, I want to do a DSCR loan, or maybe I want to do a DSCR cash out. I want to buy another property. Oh, cool. That's a conversation for you guys right there. Are you looking to buy another investment property? What are you looking to do? That's potentially another loan for you guys, right? Maybe you wouldn't have known that up front if you didn't ask those questions. Hopefully you see where I'm going with that. But it's a big thing in relationship building for you guys. Obviously, not setting the proper expectations up front is frustrating, but hopefully this will help you guys with certain questions to ask. So I think another thing I see, another common mistake I see is not asking, the fact-finding questions up front, right? As we touched a few slides back, I think in some cases, if, I look at it, I have a conversation with a few of my brokers, if we would have just taken a few minutes up front from the jump, and had a conversation to get all the information that we need to make the informed decision before starting the loan process, it would have been huge. And, in the previous situation I had where we started a DSCR loan, maybe if we talked to the borrower, maybe the realtor partner, we would have known, hey, look, I don't think this is really going to rent, based on market rent. It's not going to rent as well as what our pity payment is. Certain areas aren't going to be as strong in that sense, right? So those are some common mistakes I see. It's always important to vet these things up front, because many loan issues happen because the borrower, was placing the wrong product up front. And hopefully, you guys can use me and Oaktree as a way to, help you vet these deals out from the front. That way you don't want to run into a situation where maybe it's a tough borrower, maybe they're super picky about things. The last thing you want to do is tell them in 2 weeks, right, we have to flip the loan program. If we just started DSCR from the get-go or started bank statement from the get-go, we would never have ran into this situation, right? And the cool thing about DSCR is, obviously, maybe I touched a little bit more on bank statement as why, bank statement can be easier than DSCR based on the property as a cash flow. Let's also look at the simple fact that maybe you got a borrower that's looking to purchase an investment property. He knows that he has strong income, being as a self-employed borrower, strong business, and he tells you up front, hey, I want to go 80% bank statement. You tell him that he's looking to buy he's looking to buy an investment property, but he's just set on using bank statement because he knows he can, right? That's your way of telling him, hey, man, look, I mean, hopefully, well, I guess I'll touch on that after. Hopefully, what I'm thinking is if he starts bank statement, that's your option to tell him, well, look, you're trying to buy an investment property. Look, you may have strong income, but why don't we look at doing a DSCR loan? I don't have to look at any of your income docs. It's way simpler. How will the property cash flow? Let's just look at that. Tell him, wow, I think you'd be a, it'd be a game saver for him, right? He's like, oh, look, I don't have to provide in this documentation. I can just go DSCR. I've seen that happen, and borrowers love it. It's your guys' opportunity to earn more business from them. And then that's another conversation setter from right there, right? Let's tell them, hey, look, let's do a DSCR loan on this. Well, cool. I actually want to do a few of these. Maybe that's 3 or 4 deals for you right there, right? So just something to think about. It's not always going to work bank statement. It's not always going to work DSCR, but they're both solid programs. And if I miss anything, you guys have any questions, like I said, I will go over those at the end. hopefully I'm not moving too quick. But obviously, I do like this. I do love both these programs, but hopefully, some of these common mistakes that you guys can see up front. Biggest thing is just vetting these deals out up front, right? So the last slide we have here is obviously just a thank you to you guys. Hopefully, if you guys have any questions, like I said, I'll run through those. Thank you guys. As you can tell, I do love this stuff. I do love going over these programs. I'm always willing to help. All my contact information is right here below. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to call. Let me check out the chat box here. I actually lost that. Give me 1 second here. Let's see if I can find that chat box. 1 second here. Let's see. Where is my... Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second. Let me pull up this chat box. I'm not missing questions from you guys. See if they have this. Let me see here. Okay, I had my organizer send me over some of the, it looks like this was the question that was asked. Questions, let me see. Give me 1 second here. Okay, hopefully you are still here. Karen, I saw Karen, you had asked a question in the chat. Let me get to that. Looks like that was actually the only question. You said, why do you say it's important to ask about DSCR if they own a primary residence? DSCR. So it's important to ask, oh, actually, let me go back to that slide. So it's super important up front. Actually, let me see here if I can go back. 1 second here. Go back for you here. Let me see. Where am I at here? Try to get both things organized here. Yeah, so it is important to ask up front, if they're looking to do a DSCR loan, if they own a primary residence. Karen, the reason that this is important, if they don't own a primary residence, we really want to know why. If the borrower is looking to purchase a DSCR property and they don't own a primary residence, our worry, especially from an underwriting standpoint as a lender, is as a DSCR loan, you can't occupy this as a primary residence as a borrower. You obviously can't occupy it as a primary. It has to be, it's all investment only. That's the whole purpose of DSCR. We want to know if they own a primary residence. If they don't, if they do, great. It's a simple loan. If they don't, it's not that we can't do it. We just have to be able to prove that they're not going to occupy it because it is an investment loan. So that really is the biggest thing. But again, if you guys have any other questions, like I said, please feel free here. Let me get back to the last slide. Here's my information here. There's my there's my name, Logan Kincaid, account executive, LKincaid@OaktreeFunding.com, and there is my phone number below. Looks like we have another question here. Give me 1 second. Oh, one more question from Joseph. Hey, Joseph, can we do 90% on a DSCR loan? No, we cannot. We can go to 85%, but 90% will not work. The only way we can go 90% is we do have some options as bank statement and full doc to go 90%, but when it comes to DSCR, we cannot do 90%. It would be 85%, and that comes with its own restrictions as well, even at 85%, because that's actually a little bit of a newer update that we had over the last few months. Is I guess I believe it was the last few months was doing 85%. Typically, the max on that's going to be $1 million loan amount, and it comes with its own FICO restrictions as well. We typically want to see, John a blank, I believe it's 720 or 740 FICO. We're going to want to see even to do 85%. But no, we would not be able to do 90%, unfortunately. And again, if you guys have any other questions, like I said, please feel free to call me or email me. Like I said, I'm here. If I missed anything or if I went too quick, I apologize. But yeah, like I said, thank you guys for showing up. I really do appreciate your time. Hopefully that gave you guys a piece of information to go over with your borrowers up front. And like I said, feel free to give me a call. We can chat about this anytime. I love doing this. So call me or email me with any questions. And thank you guys so much for showing up. I appreciate it.